Hillary, what's your response?
Again, I think it's hard for Americans to understand, but around the world, people, governments see the Palestinians here as the victim. And so her comments may not be as persuasive here in the United States as they are around the world. But when I served at the UN, I was there on 9/11, and it was the only time that I remember, or other diplomats there remember, there being a standing ovation for a resolution passing. And that resolution was for the United States to use whatever force necessary to respond to 9/11. The second time that happened, in my memory, from what I understand, was when the UN voted here against Israel with this resolution. The anger, the disappointment, the distrust of what the Israelis are doing is profound around the world. And I know it's hard for Americans to understand, but we just got this wake-up call.
Meantime, Israel is temporarily suspending what they call working ties with a dozen different nations. These are all the nations that voted in favor of a UN resolution condemning Israeli settlements. This move comes amid increased tension between Benjamin Netanyahu and President Obama. Our Oren Lieberman is live for us now in Jerusalem with more. What's the latest?
Well, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hasn't backed down at all of his criticism of President Barack Obama and the other countries, and he hasn't apologized in any way for the diplomatic actions he's taken against those other countries. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, Netanyahu's accusations against the Obama administration. He says that Obama was behind the UN Security Council resolution, drafting it, writing it, and pushing it. Here is his spokesman, David Keyes, leveling that accusation again.
We have ironclad information from sources in the Arab world and internationally, and we're going to share that information with the incoming administration through the proper channels, and if the new administration chooses to share that information, that's their prerogative.
We have repeatedly pushed the Israelis, both Keyes and other Israeli officials, on what that information is, what that evidence is, and we have yet to get an answer, and yet it's an accusation they keep on repeating. As for diplomatic actions Netanyahu has taken, he has limited working ties with the ambassadors and ministries of countries that voted for the resolution. That has little practical effect, but it's a big statement expressing Netanyahu's anger, and the story may not be over yet. Don, in just a couple of weeks, there's an international peace conference trying to make some progress on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel has said they will not attend. And then, of course, in just a few days, we expect Secretary of State John Kerry to lay out his vision for peace. Don?
All right, Oren, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let's discuss now with James Jeffrey. He is a former U.S. ambassador to Iraq and Turkey and is currently a visiting fellow at the Washington Institute. And Hillary Mann Leverett is here as well. She served in the State Department for 15 years, including the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv, and represented the U.S. in UN Security Council deliberations. I'm so glad to have both of you on. Let's get right to it. Benjamin Netanyahu is suspending working ties with 12 nations that voted for the UN resolution condemning Israeli settlements. And ironically, that doesn't include the U.S., which abstained. What kind of message do you think he is trying to send here? This is for you, Hillary.
Well, I think he's trying to divert attention to how profoundly isolated this vote in the Security Council shows Israel to be on the world stage, both the depth and breadth of Israel's isolation. Netanyahu, I think, is trying to double down on his policies to show that Israel actually is in the driver's seat. It's controlling its own policies. But what the UN Security Council vote shows us is how profoundly isolated they are and how dependent Israel really is on its relationship with the United States and with the incoming Trump administration, which I think for all of the happiness that many in Israel professed for the incoming Trump administration, there's also very deep concern about how Trump will handle Israel and the Middle East peace process.
Jeffrey, why make yourself more isolated?
Well, first of all, Israel isn't isolated. Israel has the best relations it's ever had in the Arab world. It has good trading relations with China. It has in-depth dialogue with Russia, particularly over Syria. The problem is Israel is isolated in the UN. It has always been isolated in the UN. The difference this time is the United States allowed the UN vote to go forward. Normally the U.S. blocks it. That is the difference. It's not something new about Israel and the UN.
Mr. Jeffrey, sorry, I should have called you James. Listen, Israel is upping the ante. It's calling its evidence that the U.S. pushed through this resolution. And here is saying that it has ironclad information. Take a listen to this, and then we'll discuss.
We have ironclad information from sources in the Arab world and internationally, and we're going to share that information with the incoming administration through the proper channels, and if the new administration chooses to share that information, that's their prerogative.
Poppy Harlow interviewed him this morning just a couple of minutes ago and pressed him on that issue. What's the evidence? Why not put that evidence out right now with the current administration, deal with it with the current administration instead of the incoming administration?
My perspective is, again, it shows the profound isolation and in some ways desperation of the Netanyahu government. They really missed this coming. The UN vote hit them like a train coming down the tunnel, just like Obama's pursuit of the nuclear deal with Iran. And I think what you're seeing happen is these various reactions really out of desperation, surprise, and a disorientation in terms of what Israel can or should do. What kind of evidence there could be is really, I think, very speculative. But what they're trying to do is say that this is a personal problem for President Obama, and somehow the incoming Trump administration is going to take care of it. But I think the Israelis are also very wary because Trump's nomination, for example, for a Secretary of State or a Secretary of Defense do not have stellar pro-Israel records. And I think the Israelis are concerned and acting out of desperation.
James, I interviewed Dr. Hassan Ashrawi moments ago here on CNN, just a PLO Executive Committee member, and asked her about the Palestinian role in all of this and recognizing Israel as a Jewish state. Here's her response.
I mean, if you want to give religion to states, then this is against our principles. I don't recognize Islamic states. I don't recognize Christian states. I don't recognize Jewish states. A state is a state for all its citizens. It has to be democratic, inclusive, tolerant, and has to be genuinely representative of all its people. You cannot give added value to any people because of their religion or ethnicity.
Is Israel getting added value because of ethnicity or religion?
Not at all. The original UN resolution back in 1948 talked about an Arab state and a Jewish state. In fact, Palestine is a member of the Arab League. Arab states all over the region call themselves Arab states. There's nothing new in this. There's a specific difference because Judaism is both an ethnicity and a religion. That's a minor difference. This is a basic issue of concern between the two sides.
Hillary, what's your response?
Again, I think it's hard for Americans to understand, but around the world, people, governments see the Palestinians here as the victim. And so her comments may not be as persuasive here in the United States as they are around the world. But, when I served at the UN, I was there on 9/11, and it was the only time that I remember, or other diplomats there remember, there being a standing ovation for a resolution passing. And that resolution was for the United States to use whatever force necessary to respond to 9/11. The second time that happened, in my memory, from what I understand, was when the UN voted here against Israel with this resolution. The anger, the disappointment, the distrust of what the Israelis are doing is profound around the world. And I know it's hard for Americans to understand, but we just got this wake-up call, and it's going to be important for the Trump administration to handle it very soberly.
Hey, James, speaking of the Trump administration, of the incoming administration and the Obama administration, I'm talking about one president at a time. Donald Trump is taking a big role here with Israelis, going so far as to personally reach out to him. Is this a big violation of the no two presidents tradition? Is it dangerous?
It is what it is. First of all, it is unusual. There have been some allegations in the past, what Nixon was doing in the run-up to his taking power, particularly vis-a-vis Vietnam. So there are some precedents. It's something that, at the end of the day, everybody knows we're in a transition, that Barack Obama is the president, but that the things he declares, the things he does, have a half-life of about 2.5 weeks. On the other hand, everybody also knows that the Donald Trump we will get as president may or may not be the Donald Trump that we're seeing in tweets.
Hillary, is it dangerous?
I agree. It is something that we've seen for decades. But even more important, I think, than the Israelis reaching out are the Egyptians. The Egyptians can read the political map, I think, very accurately. And they also reached out to Donald Trump. Were the first to congratulate him in a phone call. And I think the rush of foreign leaders trying to congratulate Trump shows how seriously they're taking him on the world stage. And I think, pundits and commentators here who have dismissed Trump and underestimate him, both here at home, will now have to face up to that abroad, where he's going to make a big difference, a big impact.
Hillary, James, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fascinating interview.